Hopefully we'll start doing that. There we go. Okay. So here was our warm-up. Looks like most of us have finished it. So the two things that we want to add together, 6 and 3x. And we want to set it equal to 5x. So if you did that, you started off on the right track. Then we just have to subtract 3x from both sides to get 2x over here. And we're left with just 6 over here. Then dividing by 2 on both sides, we get x is 3. And we don't want to stop there, though. We were asked, what is uv? So we plugged that back in. uv was 3x, so 3 times 3, which is 9. So if you got 9 for your answer, you are correct. If you got something besides 9 for your answer, then go back and take a look at it and see if you can figure out what step something went wrong. Okay. Otherwise, today we are moving on to 1.3. 1.3 involves a lot of things, so we're going to spend 2 days on 1.3. 1.3 involves something called the distance formula and the midpoint formula. So we're going to start with midpoints today. So here we are, starting it on our notes. Hopefully you've got some notebook paper of some kind there to take notes on. If you don't, try to find some and something to write with. Also, if I'm ever writing like way too fast for you, if it just works better for you to like, you know, let the kind of take in the notes and not write as we go, feel free to do that and write down your notes later. But here we go. Hopefully, and if I'm going like way too fast, you feel free to let me know in the chat. Okay. 1.3, part 1. Midpoints. So we want to be able to do two things today. One, we want to be able to find the midpoint when given two endpoints. And then we also want to be able to find the other endpoint when given a midpoint and an endpoint. Okay, so we want to be able to find the midpoint, and then we want to also be able to find an endpoint if we're given a midpoint and an endpoint. So we're going to discuss how to do both of those things today. But first of all, we need to know what we mean by midpoint and what the midpoint formula is, because there is a formula for it. So this is going to involve coordinate points, kind of like some of our stuff yesterday did. So the midpoint formula. So the midpoint formula, formally stated, starts at, for 2 points, x1, y1, and x2, y2, the midpoint is defined as xm ym equals x1 plus x2 divided by 2, y1 plus y2 divided by 2. Okay, so basically, in order to find a place that is halfway between 2 points, you have kind of average the points. You take the x values, you add them up and divide it by 2. You take the y values, you add them up and divide it by 2. So let's see how this would actually work out. Let's say we're given 2 points. We'll say A is 3, -1, or sorry, -2, and B is -5, 4. Okay, so we could just plug these things in and go right away, but what I like to do at first is kind of take a look at the graph of what it would look like. So I'm going to make a little graph over here before we stick things into the formula. So we're going to go, okay, A is over 1, 2, 3, and down 2. And B is over to -5, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and up 4. Yes, this says XM and YM. It stands for the X coordinate of the midpoint and the Y coordinate of the midpoint. All right, so then B is up 4, so 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Well, drawing lines without a ruler is difficult. Okay, there we go. So that's approximately what AB would look like. And we want to figure out what the midpoint would be. We'll use the formula and then we'll plot what we get for the midpoint on here just to make sure that things make sense, that it looks right. Okay, the first thing I like to do when I'm finding the midpoint is label my 2 points. Because in the formula, we refer to these x1, y1, and x2, y2. I want to make sure that I've got that figured out in my coordinate. So I'm going to label x1, y1, x2, y2. And it doesn't matter which point is which. This one could be x1, y1, and this one could be x2, y2 if you want. It just has to be consistent. So both of my coordinates from here have to be the 1. Both of my coordinates from here have to be the 2, or vice versa. Okay, now we're going to stick this into the formula. So here we go. We've got x1 plus x2. So that would be 3 plus -5 divided by 2. And then we have y1 plus y2, so -2 plus 4 divided by 2. Then we want to just simplify this. So 3 plus -5 is -2. -2 plus 4 is +2. And so then we keep going, we keep simplifying. -2 divided by 2 is -1. +2 divided by 2 is +1. So the coordinate for our midpoint would be -1, 1. So let's check and see if that makes sense. Over on our graph here, if I go over to -1 and up 1, first of all, it lands on our line segment, so that's a good indicator. And then you can kind of visually inspect. Does this look about halfway across? I think it does. I mean, up to like, you know, I didn't draw a perfect graph here, so it's probably a little bit off. Just because, you know, I didn't measure all of the distances between these. But it looks pretty close. It landed on our line segment, and it looks to be about halfway. So that's a good indicator, you know, an easy way to check your work and make sure that it looked, you know, that it's close or about right. So there's our answer. Okay, so that's one way that we will see the midpoint formula used. You'll be given 2 points, and you'll be asked to find the midpoint. Any questions up to this point? Any numbers we're not sure where they came from, or steps we're not sure why they happened? Okay. If at any point you have a question, either unmute yourself or type something in the chat. we're going to do another example. So here we go, example number 2. This time we're given 2 points again. We'll say A is 2, -1, and B is 5, 3. This time I won't make us graph it. But the first thing we want to do is label our 2 points, x1, y1, x2, y2. So let's do that really quick. We have x1, y1, x2, y2. Okay, and if you're ahead of me here, feel free to stick it into the formula on your own and solve it. If you would like to stick with me and watch the example, that is good too. So remembering our midpoint formula, we know it's supposed to be x1 plus x2 divided by 2, y1 plus y2 divided by 2. So in this case, we're taking x1 and x2. So that would be 2 plus 5 divided by 2. And then y1 plus y2. So -1 plus 3 divided by 2. So then 2 plus 5 is 7. And -1 plus 3 is 2. Continuing to simplify here, 7 divided by 2. If you're asked for the number as a decimal, like if it's okay to leave it as a decimal, you can put it as 3.5. And then 2 divided by 2 is 1. If you're asked to put it as a mixed number, then you might want to put it as 3.5. But typically, in the case of midpoints, it's okay to leave it as a decimal, especially because it's a terminating one, like it's just 3.5. It doesn't continue on forever or anything like that. So I would say 3.51, and that would be it. There's our midpoint. Okay. Any questions with that one? Any numbers that we're not sure where they came from? Steps we're not sure why they happened? Okay. Then I'm going to give you guys one to try on your own. I'll leave mine up here. And this time we'll say that A is -3, 10. And B is 4, -7. Go ahead and try finding the midpoint for those ones. Once you've got it, type done in the chat. Looks like some of us are getting done. I'll wait another minute or two. If you labeled your points this way to start off, you're on the right track. All right, looks like most of us have got it. So if you took your x values and added them together, you get -3 plus 4 divided by 2. So -3 plus 4 is +1 divided by 2. And then 10 plus -7 is +3 divided by 2. So you can write this, you can leave it this way if you would like to leave it as fractions, or you can write it as 0.5, 1.5. So if you got 0.5, 1.5, or 1/2, 3/2, either of those answers work for me. Okay. Any questions at this point on how to find a midpoint? You wrote it different. Did you write it as 1/2 and then 1.5? That would also work. Okay. Any questions at this point? Okay. Well, the next section involves being given a midpoint and an endpoint and being asked to find the other end. So this way is a little bit more difficult. It's kind of like the next level here. So we call these midpoint-endpoint problems. Okay, and the easiest way to do these ones is to use the midpoint formula and be, this is the reason that we wrote that XM, YM in there. This is going to help us out here. So let's do an example here. Let's say that one of our endpoints is the point do 3, 5. And then the midpoint is, let's say, 1, we'll say it's 1, 1. Or no, actually, we'll say it's 1, 2 for the sake of making things easy to follow. Okay, so we have our endpoint, we have our midpoint, we want to find the other endpoint. Okay, so to do this, let's take a look at our midpoint formula the way it was written at the beginning. So we had XM, YM equals x1 plus x2 divided by 2, y1 plus y2 divided by 2. So since these are coordinates, this coordinate, this x coordinate, corresponds to the x coordinate here. These are equal. And then this y coordinate, the y coordinate of the midpoint here, corresponds to the equation for the y coordinate of the midpoint. These are equal. So what I'm going to do here is kind of break this apart a little bit. We're going to say that the x coordinate of the midpoint is equal to x1 plus x2 divided by 2. And then for a separate equation, we're going to have the y coordinate of the midpoint is equal to y1 plus y2 divided by 2. So then, looking up here at what we're given, we know that this is an endpoint. So endpoints are given things like x1, y1. So basically the idea here so far is that since this is my x midpoint, I'm setting it equal to the equation for the x midpoint. Since this is my y midpoint, I'm setting it equal to the equation for the y midpoint. So then when I go to label the pieces up here, my endpoint will be my x1, y1. My midpoint, though, will be xm, ym. So midpoint, the only difference here so far is that we're labeling the midpoint as xm, ym. Then we can take these things and plug them into the equation. So let's start with this one, the x values. I can take my x midpoint coordinate, which is 1, and I'm going to plug it in for xm. So I'm going to say 1 equals, and then my x1 coordinate, I'm going to plug that in for x1. So we'd have 3, and then I don't know what x2 is. That's what I'm solving for. So we have 3 plus x2 divided by 2. Okay. So here's the equation that we end up with one piece missing. And we can solve for that missing piece. But to start, since we've got this denominator going on over here, I want to get rid of that. So I want to multiply by 2 on both sides. So we get 2 equals 3 plus x2. Then we subtract 3 on both sides, and we get -1 equals x2. So that's going to be part of our answer. That's the x coordinate for our endpoint. Then we're going to do the same thing with the y coordinates. So I'm going to go over here, and my y midpoint, well, I know that 2 is the coordinate for my y, the y coordinate of my midpoint. So I'm going to take that and plug it in for y midpoint. Okay.
Miss Lindell?
Yes.
Can you please slow down a little bit?
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. So to just kind of recap what we did for the x coordinate real quick here. We took the midpoint, x value, and we plugged it in for xm. We took the x1 value and plugged it in down here for x1. So we got 1 equals 3 plus x2 divided by 2. And then we just solved this. So we multiplied by 2 on both sides to get rid of the denominator, subtracted 3 on both sides, and we found our x2 value. So that's going to be part of our answer here. So for y, we do the exact same thing. We take the y value, and we plug it in for ym. So we go 2 equals. And then y1, that was our value up here, that was 5. So we go 5 plus y2 divided by 2. And then we do the exact same method of solving it. We multiply by 2 on both sides to get rid of the denominator. And we get 4 equals 5 plus y2. Then we just have to subtract 5 from both sides. And we get -1 equals y2. So in this case, our new coordinate for our endpoint is just x2, y2. So it's -1, -1, which ends up being our answer. Okay. So this sort of problem takes some getting used to usually. Most people see the find the midpoint problems and go, okay, I got this. These ones are pretty easy. But then we see the midpoint endpoint problems, and those ones take a moment to wrap your brain around it. one way that's kind of nice to look at it is using a graph. So before we move on from this problem, I'm going to show you guys the graph of it, and we'll kind of go from there, because that should help things make a little bit more sense here. Okay, so if I make a graph, we were told that our endpoint was 3, 5, so over 3 and up 5. So there's point A. We were told that our midpoint was 1, 2. So I'm going to go over 1 and up 2, and this was our midpoint. Okay. So if that's our midpoint, then the other endpoint is going to continue on somewhere down along this line, right? And in fact, it ends up being -1, -1. So it ends up being like right there, our other endpoint. That was what we solved it as anyway. But another way that you could think of finding the other endpoint, you could do it graphically. You could go, okay, if I'm starting at A and I'm trying to get to my midpoint, well, A is up here at 5, so I'd have to go down 1, 2, 3. And it's over here at 3, and this is at 1, so I'd have to go over 1, 2. So to get to my other endpoint, I could just go down 3 and over 2 again. I could go down 1, 2, 3, and over 1, 2, and that would get me to my other endpoint. So that's another way that you could think of this. You could do it graphically. So if that helps it to make more sense, then use it. If it does not help it to make more sense, if the equation way clicked with you, then do it with the equations. Okay. At this point, this was kind of a longer example. Are there any questions, any numbers that don't make sense? We're not sure where they came from or anything like that. Okay. So let's try another one. Let's do another one of these. I think this is example 4 at this point, but a different one of this type. Okay, so we'll say that one of our endpoints is, we'll say, -2, 4. And our midpoint is 0, -2. Okay, so for this one, same idea, same process. I'm going to label this endpoint as x1, y1. I'm going to label my midpoint as xm, ym. And then I'm going to bring out my equations. So we're going to go xm equals x1 plus x2 divided by 2. And ym equals y1 plus y2 divided by 2. Okay. So for this one, go ahead and take your values here, your x1, y1, and your xm, ym, and plug them in where you think they go in the equations. Take a moment and try plugging them in where you think they're supposed to go. And if you're ahead of us and want to work ahead on this one, feel free to do that. Okay, for your x equation, if you set up 0 equals -2 plus x2 divided by 2, you're on the right track. So you can kind of use that to model off for the y equation if you need to. And if you think you have both equations right, feel free to solve them. Okay. And then for your y equation, if you got -2 equals 4 plus y2 divided by 2, you are on the right track. So go ahead and try solving both of these. Once you're done solving them both, type done in the chat. Okay. Looks like a lot of us are getting done. If you're checking yourself, if you got 2 and -8, you did things correctly. If you got something besides 2 and -8, go back and check and see if we can figure out where we missed a step or where something went wrong. Okay. And the way that we would write our final answer is as a coordinate point, the coordinate point 2, -8. That would be our other endpoint. So that would be our final answer right there. Okay. Any questions up to this point? Okay. Let's see. I'm going to go ahead and post the assignment for you guys, and then we'll go from there. Okay. So let's go ahead and take a look at Google Classroom. Okay. So for today, we have 2 IXL sections. The first one is called Midpoint Formula, Find the Midpoint. So these are just like the ones that we did at the beginning of class. And then we have IXL Midpoint Formula, Find the Endpoint. And those are just like the ones that we just did. So you can click on either of these to be taken directly to the section that you're supposed to do. They're also known as Geometry B9 and B10, if that's the way you want to look it up. Make sure you log in with Clever when you get to IXL.